In the days before modern navigation equipment, a ship lost in a fog bank was essentially sailing blind, with little more to rely on than a captain's skill. Dead reckoning, an imperfect method of navigation that measured how far a ship has traveled from a fixed point, often led vessels miles off course, and could do nothing to anticipate what lay hidden in the fog. To avoid a potentially deadly collision, ships relied on their foghorns, blown at regular intervals at all hours, to warn nearby ship traffic. During the summer months from June to October, dense fog banks are a common occurrence along the Pacific coastline of the United States and caused numerous shipwrecks at the beginning of the 20th century. Fierce competition between the steamship companies that operated between the major cities of California, Oregon, Washington, and Alaska put enormous pressure on steamship captains. Many of these companies were operated by railroads, which were accustomed to maintaining a strict schedule no matter the conditions. But these customs were poorly suited for the treacherous and unpredictable waters of the wild Pacific Ocean. When the swirling mist of a looming fog bank rolled in, captains often maintained a high speed, their foghorns blaring, hoping that no danger loomed in the fog. Before we get into things, I want to take a brief moment to talk about this video's sponsor, Ground News. Researching historic events quickly teaches you that a story can change wildly depending on who's telling it. Every media outlet, even those from back at the turn of the century, have some type of bias that impacts how they cover a story. Because of that, I find it best to survey a variety of sources to get the full picture when doing research and when I'm reading about what's going on today. That's why I love using Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that helps you easily compare news coverage by aggregating multiple sources in one place. They give media outlets a bias rating that tells you if the source is left or right-leaning or centrist, so you can get a good idea of how a topic is being covered from all ends of the political spectrum. And if you're short on time, you can use Ground News to show you headlines from multiple outlets, or if you want to read something more in depth, you can easily read full articles. It's a great way to stay on top of the news. If you watch this channel a lot, you know that I value seeing things from multiple perspectives. That can be daunting these days, but Ground News makes it easier to stay informed. To compare news coverage from around the world across the political spectrum, check out Ground News by visiting ground.news/bigoldboats, or click on the link in my description below. Thank you so much to Ground News for sponsoring this video. Now back to the story of the SS Columbia. On December 31st, 1879, in Menlo Park, New Jersey, Thomas Edison unveiled his most famous invention, the carbon filament light bulb. While others had already stumbled on this invention, Edison's New Year's Eve display of his incandescent light bulb was the first to capture the public's imagination. He famously proclaimed that he will make electricity so cheap that only the rich will burn candles. One of those attending this event was Henry Villard, the president of the Oregon Railroad and Navigation Company. Like pretty much everyone else, Belyk thought this newfangled electric light was pretty darn cool, and he immediately requested that Edison install his electric lighting system on his company's newest steamer, the SS Columbia. That same year, the Oregon Railway and Navigation Company bought and merged with the Oregon Steamship Company, greatly expanding their steamship routes. To operate these new routes, a state-of-the-art steamship was ordered in July 1879. Labeled hull number 193, this new steamship was constructed at the John Roach & Sons Delaware River Iron Shipbuilding and Engine Works shipyard in Chester, Pennsylvania. Construction began in September 1879, and the ship was launched on February 24, 1880. Not trusting the new electrical equipment, John Roach refused to install the incandescent lighting system at his shipyard, fearing that it could spark a fire. So in spring of 1880, the Columbia was sailed to New York City, where Edison and his team installed the system themselves. The lights were lit on May 2, 1880, the first commercial installation of Edison's new light bulb. The Columbia's owners were clearly interested in equipping their new steamship with the latest comforts and technology. She measured 309 feet in length with a beam of 38.5 feet and came in at 2,721 tons. She was equipped with 4 decks and powered by 6 coal-burning boilers that fed two compound condensing steam engines to power a single 16-foot diameter Hirsch 4-bladed propeller, achieving a 16-knot service speed, which was respectable for the time. A second auxiliary steam engine powered her electric lights. She was also equipped with a brigantine rig sail plan that could be rigged upon two iron masts. This was just before steam power was trusted enough to forego sails altogether. She could carry 382 passengers between her first class and steerage. Designed to service the San Francisco to Portland route, she was equipped with several safety features. She carried 8 metal lifeboats, 1 wooden lifeboat, and a wooden workboat, along with 5 life rafts and 537 life preservers. The Columbia sailed around Cape Horn to San Francisco in the summer of 1880, carrying a shipment of 13 locomotives and 200 railroad cars. Once in San Francisco, her original carbon paper filament bulbs were replaced by newer bulbs with bamboo filaments. Columbia's engineer sent a letter of satisfaction with the system to Edison, reporting that none of the lights gave out after 415 hours and 45 minutes of constant use. She arrived in Portland for the first time on August 28. Her electric lights were a great success, and soon other shipping companies had similar systems installed in their vessels, with Cunard's SS Servia being the first major transatlantic ocean liner fitted with incandescent light bulbs. The Columbia's owners and the traveling public were delighted with her as she set out on a long and celebrated career. At the turn of the century, the Union Pacific Railroad took over the Oregon Railway and Navigation Company, and in 1904, the subsidiary changed its name to the San Francisco and Portland Steamship Company. For over 2 decades, the Columbia served her passengers and company well, and carried a solid reputation for reliability. In July 1895, her original Edison generators were replaced by a more modern system, and her original dynamos were donated to the Smithsonian. By the early years of the 20th century, the iron-hulled Columbia was now outclassed by a new generation of steam vessels, but her owners still had faith in the old vessel, and she was regularly maintained and refitted. On April 18, 1906, while the Columbia was dry docked at the Union Iron Works in San Francisco for a refit, the city was devastated by a massive earthquake. The violent shaking knocked the Columbia off her supports, and she rolled onto her side, puncturing her plates in 9 places and partially flooding her hull. Despite the damage, her owners were not ready to retire the old steamship, and over the course of 2 months, the holes were patched and the water was pumped out. She was then transported to the dock at Hunter's Point, where more extensive repairs could be made. She was nearly lost during transport when she encountered heavy seas. Her steam pipes burst, and the crippled ship developed a heavy list. Thinking she was only moments away from an explosion, her crew hastily abandoned her. But she was soon recovered and towed to the dry dock, where she underwent extensive repairs. She was soon returned to service in January of 1907. Aside from briefly getting stuck in pack ice on the Columbia River, the steamship Columbia finally resumed operating her regular route between San Francisco and Portland. While she was well past her prime, she continued to serve reliably, but her long and storied career would soon come to a sudden and violent end. As the sun rose over San Francisco on the morning of Saturday, July 20th, 1907, the city found itself shrouded in a dense fog. If you're familiar with San Francisco, you know that this is typical weather for the city. For the 27-year-old SS Columbia, the fog was nothing more than an annoying inconvenience as she prepared for another routine voyage to Portland. But it was dense enough that it delayed her 11 a.m. sailing, giving a handful of late-arriving passengers a chance to board the ship. The convention for the National Education Association recently wrapped up in Los Angeles, and many of the Columbia's passengers were schoolteachers. Lulu Hansen, a young teacher from Minneapolis, was touring the West Coast on her way home. as was Emma Grice, another teacher from Cleveland. Other passengers came from all walks of life. Ottilia Lydell taught music in San Francisco. She was traveling to Portland for vacation. Stella Cannon, her brother Louis, and their elderly mother were on their way to visit Stella's older brother. Maybelle Watson was the 16-year-old daughter of a prominent family in Berkeley, California. She was heading to Portland to visit her brother. 20-year-old William J. Smith, the son of an army contractor, was returning home to Vancouver, Washington, after visiting some friends in San Francisco. On this voyage, the Columbia carried 251 passengers and crew. She was commanded by Captain Peter Doran. The fog over San Francisco soon broke to reveal a pleasant summer day. The Columbia left about an hour after her scheduled departure time and sailed north for the mouth of the Columbia River in Oregon. Several passengers, including Lulu Hansen, spent the first few hours of the voyage on deck, enjoying the beautiful weather and the scenery of the California coast. But as the Columbia steamed past Point Reyes, a swell gradually developed. As the ship rocked from side to side, Lulu and many other passengers began to experience seasickness, and many retired to their cabins early. As the sun set, a heavy fog bank soon enveloped the ship. Captain Doran, who had recently retired to his cabin for the evening, returned on bridge to guide his vessel. While these conditions were difficult, they were typical for the Northern California coast, and Captain Doran maintained the Columbia's high speed, eager to make up for the time lost from their delayed departure. He was joined on bridge by Quartermaster J. Ellis and Second Officer Richard Agarup. Just past midnight, approximately 12 miles off Shelter Cove, Lookout S.G. Peterson stood tense at a station as he peered into the darkness. The fog was so thick that he could only see approximately 2 ship lengths ahead of them. As was customary for these conditions, the Columbia sounded her fog whistle at regular intervals as she sailed blindly through the night. Not long into his watch, right after the Columbia's fog whistle cut through the night, Peterson thought he heard the whistle of another ship answer back. Soon Captain Doran and Second Officer Agarup also heard the whistle, but the captain did not order his engine room to reduce their speed. Over the next 15 minutes, the Columbia continued on, with the whistle of the mystery ship ringing out every 60 seconds, growing louder with each blast. Still, Captain Doran maintained his speed. Then Agarup spotted the lights of another ship about 2 points off their starboard bow. Captain Doran ordered 2 blasts from their whistle to signal their passing, but it was too late. The oncoming ship let out 1 whistle, followed by several short blasts, the signal for imminent danger. At 5 o'clock on Saturday, July 20th, 1907, the 457-ton steam schooner San Pedro departed Eureka, California, loaded with 390,000 feet of redwood, destined for San Pedro, California. At midnight, First Officer Ben Hendrickson took charge as they sailed south through the heavy fog. Like Captain Doran, Hendrickson also chose not to reduce their speed despite the low visibility. At around 12:15 a.m., Lookout E. Soderberg shouted that he heard a faint fog whistle off their port bow. While Hendrickson didn't hear the whistle himself, he ordered a change in course, taking them further out to sea to avoid the passing traffic. He never ordered the ship to slow down as the minutes passed and the whistle of the other ship answered their own, louder and louder, until suddenly, the mast of the Columbia appeared from the fog off their port bow, nearly on top of them. Hendrickson ordered his engine stopped and let out a warning signal. At the same time, Captain Doran ordered the Columbia's engines reversed in a desperate ploy to avoid collision, but it was too late. The bow of the San Pedro slammed into the Columbia at 12:22 a.m. Doran shouted from his bridge at the San Pedro, "What are you doing, man?" as its engines reversed, pulling the 2 ships apart. The San Pedro was badly damaged. Roused by the impact, Captain Magnus Hansen climbed forward just in time to see the gaping hole in the Columbia's side as the 2 ships separated. At about 6 yards apart, the Columbia disappeared in the fog. It seemed that despite the damage, the San Pedro would just barely remain afloat, aided by the buoyant lumber in her cargo holds. Captain Hansen ordered his 3 small lifeboats lowered to pick up survivors, because it was immediately clear that the large passenger liner was doomed. On the Columbia, Captain Doran ordered Second Officer Agrup to prepare the lifeboats while he went forward to inspect the damage. Earlier that evening, passenger William Smith spent most of the night visiting Chief Engineer John F. Jackson in his cabin. He recalled that the night was especially cold and dark. As he returned to his cabin at around midnight, he could see nothing but the swirling fog in the soft glow of the ship's lights. Only moments after he began preparing for bed, he heard the exchange of fog whistles and realized something terrible was happening. He ran on deck just in time to see the San Pedro collide with the ship and then disappear into the fog. The collision felt to him like a long, soft grind, hardly enough to wake most of the sleeping passengers. Immediately realizing the severity of the situation, Smith ran back to the passenger cabins. He ran up and down the hall, pounding and kicking on doors, desperately trying to rouse the sleeping passengers who had only minutes to escape the now sinking ship. Ottilia Lydell, whose cabin was closer to the collision, had trouble sleeping due to her seasickness. She described a much more violent collision that immediately got her out of bed, certain that what she felt was a critical death blow to the ship. Chief Engineer Jackson, who just bid goodnight to Smith, was laying in his berth at the time, just dozing off when he felt the dull shock. He dressed quickly and raced to the engine room to assess the situation. He found the room dry, but he knew it wouldn't stay that way for long. He warned First Assistant Engineer M.C. Burpee, who was on watch at the time, not to let himself or the other crew get caught below. Jackson then raced up to the bridge to find out how bad the situation was, but as he reached the hurricane deck, he heard the stern voice of the captain ordering everyone to the boats. When Ottilia reached the deck, she found nothing but confusion, as no one seemed to know what to do. There was a strange but brief moment of calm immediately after the collision that lulled some into a false sense of security. A few tried to return to their staterooms, but they were stopped by the crew. Then, the vessel suddenly lurched considerably to starboard, igniting panic for the passengers still below deck, only just waking up, many of them still seasick. In the confusion, several passengers searched desperately for their life preservers, which were stowed in their cabins. William Smith did his best to help other passengers put these on. He recalled one family, a mother, father, and their 3 small children. After helping them get their life preservers on, William left to help others. He last saw them holding hands in their cabin. He learned later that the entire family was lost. As Lulu Hansen reached the top deck, she found a scene of utter chaos. She saw the captain doing his best to calm passengers, telling them to follow orders and they would be safe. Lulu recalled that he was the only cool-headed person on the ship. Once the order was given to head to the boats, Chief Engineer Jackson returned to his cabin to grab his life preserver, but he found that it was gone. Someone else must have already taken it. He then raced to the engine room, now rapidly filling with water. He called down into the darkness, but received no reply. With nothing left to do, he headed to his assigned lifeboat, number 4. By now, the Columbia was turning over so quickly that Jackson had to cut the small boat from the falls, and it was able to float free without lowering. Ottilia found herself at the Columbia's stern, with the ship sinking so fast by the bow that only 7 minutes after hearing the collision, she was now perched high above the waves on the ship, only moments away from its final plunge. In a major stroke of luck, Ottilia saw one of the ship's life rafts floating empty right below her. She instinctively jumped down, injuring her hip, but landing safely in the raft. Another woman who followed her wasn't so lucky, and Ottilia watched as she jumped and quickly disappeared in the black water. Soon others were able to climb into the raft, which drifted near the Columbia's bridge, now quickly submerging. From their vantage point, they could see Captain Doran, still at his station, bracing himself at the rail, blasting the ship's whistle. As he was taken by the waves, he extended both hands and appeared to say goodbye. The ship's ringing whistle seemed to die with him. In the pandemonium, Stella Cannon, her brother Lewis, and their mother had only moments to react to the collision. Almost as soon as they secured their life preservers and made their way on deck, the ship's final plunge was already beginning. Already exhausted, Stella's elderly mother sat on a bench at the stern. The family was separated as the ship dropped from beneath them and seemed to explode just beneath the water. Some thought that this was a boiler explosion, but it was more likely caused by collapsing air pockets deep within the ship. The violent blast fractured Stella's thumb and 2 ribs, but she was soon picked up by Chief Engineer Jackson's lifeboat. She could hear her brother's screams in the darkness and begged Jackson to row in his direction, but Jackson refused, fearing that the debris, still shooting up from the wreck, would damage and sink the already overloaded lifeboat. Fortunately, Lewis was picked up by another boat, but their mother was lost. As the ship dropped, Lulu Hansen desperately searched for a boat, but she could only find one that was still covered and lashed to the deck. Almost in an instant, she was thrown into the sea as the Columbia lurched to starboard. Fortunately, wearing a life preserver, Lulu was soon picked up by 3rd Officer House's boat. William Smith also found himself thrown into the frigid water. In the chaos, he saw the San Pedro's mast light just barely visible in the darkness. He instinctively swam for the light, almost impossibly far away. Somehow, he reached the safety of the other ship, fortunate that he was a strong swimmer. The San Pedro also picked up Ottilia's raft and several others. The small ship's deck was now barely above the waterline. Mabel Watson was able to find a place in a crowded lifeboat, one of only a few actually launched from the starboard side of the ship. But overloaded, the small craft was unable to clear the Columbia before she was sucked under. Mabel was pulled to the surface by her life preserver. She found herself surrounded by other people in the water. Then, she saw another young woman, schoolteacher Emma Grice, struggling and shouting for help. Emma's life preserver was strapped on backwards, forcing her head into the water. Mabel immediately swam over to Emma and used every ounce of strength she had to help keep her head above the water, likely saving her life. The two women were soon picked up by 3rd Officer House's lifeboat. Despite other people nearby, 16-year-old Mabel was the only one who was willing to help Emma, and she was rightfully hailed as a hero following the disaster. Soon other ships arrived on the scene to rescue survivors and relieve the San Pedro, which now refused to take on anyone else, fearing that they were only moments away from foundering. Following the collision, the Columbia dropped like a stone, sinking in just 8 or 9 minutes. Of the 251 passengers and crew on board, 88 lost their lives. Coming on the heels of the high-profile sinkings of the city of Rio de Janeiro, the Clallam, and the Valencia, the public was demanding answers. Like so many other disasters, the Columbia tragedy came with a series of random decisions and coincidences that would soon prove fateful. When Rose Anderson, a restaurant worker who was headed to Seattle via Portland, arrived at the wharf, she exchanged her ticket at the last minute with a young schoolteacher who couldn't get a ticket in time for the Columbia. Rose thought little of it, since she was in less of a hurry than the schoolteacher. She never caught the young woman's name, and never knew if she survived the sinking. Rowena and Ruby Cooper were schoolteachers from Fayette, Missouri, touring the Pacific coast. Ruby was afraid of trains, so the two decided to take the Columbia to Portland instead. When the ship sank, Ruby survived, but her sister Rowena drowned. Ruby later told a reporter that she would have rather sunk with her sister. Assistant Engineer Al Robertson learned just before the Columbia's final voyage that he was accepted to join the San Francisco Fire Department. At the last minute, he exchanged his position on the ship with another young man named Max Klaus. Max would lose his life in the sinking. It seems that those in the engine room failed to heed Chief Engineer Jackson's warning and stayed below too long. As Grace and Effie Keller of Decatur, Illinois rushed to the Spear Street wharf to catch the Columbia, they were sure that they'd missed her, arriving a few minutes past her 11 a.m. departure time. They were meeting their mother, G.A. Keller, and their sister Alma, who were also running late. The Columbia's delayed departure felt like a stroke of luck. But all 4 women died in the tragedy. With so many wrecked passenger ships, public outrage at the steamship companies in the area was reaching a fever pitch. No one could understand how the Columbia could sink so rapidly. While she was old, she was known to be reliable. She was equipped with 4 watertight compartments and had just passed a routine inspection a few months prior, certifying that she met all safety regulations at the time. Investigators determined that the Columbia's iron hull had grown brittle with age and cracked after bearing the full brunt of the collision, creating a 7-foot gash. While she had 4 watertight compartments, much like the Titanic, they did not extend the full height of her hull. This helps explain why the ship initially seemed sound. At first, the flooding impacted only one compartment, but once it spilled over into the next, it took the old ship down almost in an instant. Captain Doran and First Officer Hendrickson of the San Pedro were found to bear most of the responsibility for the accident. But Captain Doran's decisive actions and cool demeanor after the collision, and his going down with his ship, left his reputation somewhat untarnished. The crew of the San Pedro faced a harsher judgment. Hendrickson's license was suspended for 5 years. It was also determined that Captain Hansen issued insufficient orders and neglected his duties by being absent from the bridge while navigating in low visibility. The survivors, however, mostly praised the crews of both ships for their actions after the collision, for doing everything they could to save as many lives as possible. The San Pedro nearly sank herself while her crew pulled survivors from the water. At just under 10 minutes, the 4th chapter of this video, describing the events of the sinking, is longer than the time it took the Columbia to go under following the collision. 8 minutes is an incredibly fast rate of sinking for a 2,721-ton ship. It's an absolute nightmare scenario. What was once a technological marvel became a death trap. If it wasn't for the heroism of the Columbia's crew and passengers like William Smith and Maybelle Watson, many more would have lost their lives. It's a lesson that when technology fails us, we're often left on our own to watch out for each other. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video, help give this humble YouTuber a Christmas miracle by leaving a like and comment down below. And if you want more stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe to this channel. Thank you again to Ground News for supporting the channel. Check them out in the link below. As always, I'd like to give a special shout out to my supporters on Patreon. Their support helps keep this channel alive. Alright crew, that's all I've got. Until the next one, be nice to people.